Welcome to Talking Philosophy. Today we're going to have a conversation about William James. Particularly, we're going to talk about his article, The Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life. In order to understand everything that goes on in that article, we will have to make reference to some others of his works, most particularly the Dilemma of Determinism and his book, Pragmatism. William James, such a remarkable person. He studied art at one of the studios of one of the most respected painters in America at the time. While he was successful there, they discovered art wasn't really what he wanted to do. He thought he'd enrolled in the Harvard School of Science, and he did enroll, and he was successful there. But he thought maybe he needed to look at medicine, that was the real answer to his questions. He wound up going up the Amazon with Louis Agassiz, went to Europe and studied psychology with its founder, Wilhelm Wundt, came back finally to Harvard and finished his medical degree, which he never used, taught psychology, taught philosophy, and wrote on all these things and with great perception and with great influence to this day. His book on psychology, Principles of Psychology, has never been out of print. And his influence in philosophy was such that he was even published in magazines like Harper's and Atlantic and the Saturday Evening Post. But enough of that. Let's turn our attention to his article, The Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life. In it, he's trying to reply to people who have this notion of a version of ethics that doesn't seem to need any human beings in it. The kind of abstract ethics that we associated with people like Kant or Plato. James is going to try to show that there is no such ethics. That instead, ethics, like everything else in the world, grows out of the interaction between what we would call our external world and what we would call our internal world. He's going to want to suggest ultimately that no such division really exists, that it is instead always this flow back and forth, that it is each affecting the other that makes reality come into existence. Although that's a poor choice of words, I suppose. Let's say, well, no, let's stick with that. That reality is, in the end, a human concept. It's a human construction. It's something that necessarily involves human beings. But more on that in a moment. James says that anything, any truth, whether it's in the sciences or if you can talk about truth in the arts, and he was willing to talk about truth in the arts, or in philosophy or the social sciences, that the truth is an ongoing process, that we will never know the final truth until the final researcher has had their final say. Truth, then, is a quality that exists for people. Let's say that again. Truth is a quality that exists for people. It does not seem to be the case that it makes a difference to anything else on this planet, whether it is true that 2 + 2 = 4. They may know it, they may recognize it. There are at least some experiments that suggest animals from anywhere from birds to elephants can tell the difference between 2 and 3 and 3 and 5 and so forth, know which is the larger number and know what to choose to get things settled out. But that only matters to them because some scientist has made it matter to them. They really don't care. They're happy just to keep on keeping on. Human beings, and maybe other people, need to know the truth, want to know the truth. For them, truth is important. Now, what do we mean by truth? For the longest time, truth was seen as correspondence, that there was a picture in my brain that corresponded to the world. Well, some things are supposed to transcend picture. Math, for example, is supposed to transcend picture. I don't have to imagine 1,000 somethings and another 1,000 somethings to know that 1,000 plus 1,000 equals 2,000. So you say, well, the number corresponds. What does that mean? The number corresponds. How can we talk about the correspondence between a thought in my head, whatever that is, and a state of affairs in the world? Well, it was suggested perhaps then that truth emerges from the relationship between thoughts in our head and in the world by means of coherence. That is to say, we begin with a certain collection of innate truths, and by connecting those innate truths to thoughts that we have about our experiences of the world, then eventually we develop a coherent system of beliefs. And that coherence is what we mean by truth. The Sherlock Holmes stories, for the most part, match up entirely to the history of the day, so that it coheres with most people's understanding of Victorian London. They're not true. What then? Coherence seems to work, then it doesn't work. Correspondence seems to work, but it doesn't work. Enter pragmatism. Pragmatism says, look, the problem is this. You keep looking for either the truth out there or the truth in here. The truth is the interaction between those two things. Now, the problem with that is our interaction today may be different from our interaction tomorrow. And as a result, we tend to not like this. We want truth to be permanent. James is prepared to embrace what Peirce called fallibilism, the idea that something might be made false. Something that was true today might be made false tomorrow. That as our continued investigation of reality, our continued sharing of our observations with one another, may lead to something that was accepted as truth today as being rejected tomorrow. I mean, don't we all know that? Isn't that what science does? It proposes a truth today, and maybe tomorrow it's no longer true. I mean, that's reality. Today, I think something is true. Tomorrow, it turns out to be false. Except it turns out to be false because something has changed. Something in the relationship between that thing and me causes me to give it a different assignment. Move it from true to false or false to true. Okay. So now James wants to turn this set of distinctions, this methodology of discovering truth, on ethics. The first thing he wants to do is congratulate the contemporary thinkers, whether they're coming out of England, led by Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, and the illustrious John Stuart Mill, and say, you know, you're right. These people who talk about happiness like it's something that exists independent of human experience, that it's something that's transcendent and has nothing to do with pleasure or the sense of satisfaction. You know, the sense of satisfaction, not oh, you should be satisfied, but rather, I'm satisfied. I've done it the best I can. This refusal heretofore to look at the effects the external world has on our internal states of affairs, he applauds. However, he wants to look at the old school also. This notion of intuitionism, that we have a conscience, that there is a moral sense that plays a role in our adoption of ethics and ethical theories. James says, how do you explain the pleasure we receive from things which are complicated? Appreciating much of classical music requires a certain level of education about the music. Otherwise, you don't get it. He talks about, why does Nelson go into battle, become admiral of the fleet, when he's seasick every time he goes out? What James suggests is that there's an interaction going on here. Yes, the pleasure is important, but imagine a world, he says, where you could have all the pleasure. That is to say, there will be no more war, no more poverty, no more sickness. Nothing of the bad things exists in our world. Imagine aliens who come down with a technology that make it possible to live in a way where all we have to do is whatever makes us happy, that everything else will be taken care of, all of our needs, all of our problems. However, the only way they'll do it is if we give them some small child, maybe an orphan, a child alone in the world with nobody caring about it. That one small child is taken away, maybe back to the alien home planet, somewhere where we will never see them, we will never know what's going on. I mean, we'll be told up front what's going to go on, but we won't know anything happening with this child whatsoever. We will have no direct interaction with this child or its situation. There's nobody in the family to miss the child. The child has no friends. We pluck this child out of a disaster, the only survivor, and we take this child, we give it to the aliens. They give us complete and total material satisfaction. It should be leading us then to complete and total psychological satisfaction, except that child that we've given them is going to be taken away and tortured forever. Not going to be allowed to die. Going to be kept alive and tortured forever. You like that? Most people don't. Famously, Ursula Glenn took this passage and turned it into her short story, Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. And she describes exactly this community and exactly people keep walking away. Why do they walk away? Not because they've seen the child's torture, because they haven't. Not because they knew the child, because they didn't. But that there is something in us. See? And this is the thing, again, William James wants to bring to the fore over and over. Yes, there's an outside world. Yes, the outside world is there. But our interior world exists also. And when the two interact, that is when we arrive at the truth. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a little break, and we'll have the other two arguments he looks at. But at this point, James says that we have answered the psychological question of ethics. We have answered the question, where do ethics come from? Ethics come from, psychologically, the need to reconcile this internal feeling that we have with this external source of stimulus, knowing that neither of them are completely comprehensive of the truth, that truth arises from the interaction. Okay, second half coming right up. You know that you need to subscribe here on YouTube to get updates when new articles appear, like the second half of this. You'll need, if you want to chip in any to make these things a little more graphic filled, there is, or receive production credits. You did notice up front the production credit, the correction for executive producer. You want to get in on that? Patreon, and that's just www.patreon.com/talkingphilosophy. Please think about sharing this with people you know. I enjoy doing this with or without anybody listening, but I do think I say some interesting things, and I do think some of what I'm going to tell you in the second half is even more helpful than you got here in the first half. Okay? Okay. So you keep on coming back, and in between, you keep on talking philosophy.